Excellent. Okay. So before we get started, the presentation that you're about to view is the intellectual property of the Department of National Defense. Any reproduction or retransmission of the slides contained in this presentation, is strictly forbidden. Some of the topics discussed in this webinar may be of sensitive nature and not appropriate for children. We ask for parental discretion. And this webinar is being recorded and will be available for viewing later on our YouTube page. Though active participation is encouraged, you may simply follow along without using the chat, just like every other week. And the first email I sent you, the YouTube link is still the same. I did post the second week on the YouTube channel, and I'll be posting this one as well. And I'll be resending an email to everyone just as a reminder of the link, or if you're new to the workshop, then you'll be getting the link. So here we go. This is session 3. So welcome to session 3. You made it right through. It's been a good 2 weeks. Today we're going to do a review of what we did over the last couple of weeks. Just a quick review, just because some concepts sometimes we need to hear several times. And I've been teaching this over 12 years, and sometimes the concepts are like, yeah, I need to think about that again. So hearing it again is always a good thing. Today we're going to talk about avoidance and escape strategies and the timeout process that I told you about last time. And today we're going to talk about communicating with kindness. So how do we communicate something that is bothering us? Remember when we talked about that one thing that might be causing us some distress, whether that be, you know, the dishes on the counter, whether that be the socks under the table, whether that be, you know, a lot of things that sometimes people don't realize that they disturb us, or that they make us feel uncomfortable, or whatever. So we're going to talk about how to communicate with kindness. So this is going to be a really great workshop for, I guess, for ourselves to be able to describe or communicate without worrying that we're going to hurt someone's feelings. So again, review over the last few weeks: avoidance, escape strategies, timeout, and the way we're going to communicate is called the DESC script. So I like this quote from Buddha: holding on to anger is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. And that's one of the things, or that's one of the reasons that this workshop is not about anybody else but you. This is about you not feeling angry as often as you were before. This is about you working through some of the problems that anger is bringing up, because those are opportunities. Oh, really? Just a moment. Someone just started their lawnmower. I'm just going to close the window. The joys of working at home. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, so holding on to anger. Remembering that sometimes when we get angry, other people don't even know that we're angry or why we're angry, or remembering that they see it differently, so they don't understand why you're angry. And anger, if we use it over and over again as a negative emotion, then it's going to affect us. Right? So holding on to anger is not something that we want to do. We want to use anger productively. We want to use anger in a positive way, as a challenge, or as an opportunity to find out, why am I angry? What is behind that? And how can I fix it so it doesn't happen again? And that's when we talk about perception, remembering that we collect information through all of our senses, and then this data gets filtered through our own experiences and results in what we believe to be true. But each and every one of you reading this believes that something else is true. When we think about how we perceive a situation, how we perceive traffic, how we perceive the pandemic, how we, you know, some of us are thriving and living our best life, and some people are really struggling and not. And how we perceive children, how we perceive our partners, how we perceive society, we all perceive it differently. And we said that because of a few different things, not only our experiences, our culture, our age, our gender, our upbringing, whether you're hangry or not, right? I perceive things much differently when I'm hangry than when I'm not hangry. So we have to remember that in a situation, perceptions are different. Some people love cleanliness and some people don't prioritize it, right? We perceive importance differently. So why do we get angry? We get angry for a few different reasons. In response to a perceived threat. And we said a perceived threat is we're seeing something as a threat. We are seeing something as a threat. Whether that might be someone saying something, someone cutting us off in traffic, someone leaving a dish on the counter, or it could be a real threat. So we're perceiving a real threat. And so we might get angry and have to attack or respond. Now, remembering that the importance and meaning you place on a person, an event, or a situation. So if being on time is really important to you and someone else doesn't feel that way, then we can get angry at that person, not understand how they don't see it, how being on time is important. Or an event, whether that be some people love crowds and some people hate crowds, how we place importance on respect. Okay, we all see respect differently. So when we place a lot of importance on respect or what we see as respect, we can feel attacked when someone doesn't behave in a way that we expect, right? Or that we believe is appropriate or not appropriate. So there's a lot of different things that we believe is important, whether that might be, again, when we talk about, making our bed in the morning, if it drives you crazy that your kids don't make their bed in the morning because you believe that that's really important. Well, they might not believe that that's important, right? There's a lot of different things that we see differently. Unmet expectations or disappointment. And we talked about expectations a lot last week when we said, when we talked about the personal power grid and how we place expectations on other people and on society based on how we would do it or how we see how things should go. And oftentimes they're not met because they don't know everything that you expect. They're not you. So they can't expect the same level of work, the same, cleanliness. Some people expect people to know how to put things in the dishwasher. They just don't. We're constantly disappointed. Or we expect that, the government will act a certain way, our boss will act a certain way, our children will act a certain way. Or when we place an expectation on, I asked my husband to bring down a blue shirt and I expect the blue shirt to come down with him when he comes down. So if it's unmet, I'm disappointed, right? So we remember that. Or we get angry a lot when we have a lot of stress in our lives and we're not doing very much to manage that stress. And that could place a huge, huge amount of distress on our bodies, because stress is something that is not going to go away. Stress is something that's important, but there's a level of stress when we have to remember that if we live at the sort of 100% all the time, we're going to start burning out. And so if we're not doing our stress management regularly, and that means, self-care, that means exercise, that means sleeping and eating properly. So when we remember, we hold that glass. If our glass is full all the time, we're holding it out all the time, we're going to start to feel pain, discomfort. We're going to start to get cranky if we don't put our glass down often enough to go and then pick it back up again. And then we're ready to go, right? That's what I mean by having too much stress in our lives. Are we good so far? If you want to put something in the chat, you're more than welcome to do that. Stop me or whatever, you're welcome to do that. You could put your hand up with the little guy, or you can just give me a thumbs up. That's good too. Thank you. Perfect. So remembering when we talked about how much control we have on our thoughts and how our thoughts lead to our behaviors and how our thoughts lead to our emotions. When we saw that cognitive behavioral therapy model, right? So when we change our thoughts, we can change our world. And when we know that, oftentimes our thoughts often go to the negative, right? When we talked about, my husband not coming down the stairs with the blue shirt, when we automatically went to, he's ignoring me, he doesn't care, he's, lazy, he, whatever, right? All of those negative things. I would get sad or I would get frustrated and I'll just do it myself. Or my thoughts could be, maybe he didn't hear me. And then I don't have to get upset and I can just ask a question. Did you hear me? I asked you for the blue shirt. Oh yes, I just didn't know which one. Perfect. Okay, he actually cares about this. So when we talk about changing our thoughts, we have control over that, even though we don't always feel like we do. So remembering that when you feel negative or when you're reacting to something, sometimes just sit back and go, what was the story I was telling myself? Was I telling myself that that person was disrespecting me? Because they might not have been. They might just not view this particular thing as important, or whatever that might be. Okay, so remembering that our thoughts are what leads to our emotions. So when we talk about how can we improve our mental fitness or our mental health, how can we manage stress, we talked about quite a few things. And have any of you added any of our mental health exercises or any of our mental health improvement strategies to good use? So we remember that sleep is very important. So remember, getting your 7 hours or more is the only way we're going to recover, is the only way we're going to manage moods, manage stress, manage distress, manage emotions, consolidate to memory, build bone mass and muscle mass. Really important. Remember, physical activity and nutrition. Those are the top 3 most important things of where we should be starting our road to mental wellness, right? Those are the top 3 things. Oh, great. You have been using a sleep tracker app. Excellent. Right? Whatever works. It's like a step tracker or a sleep tracker, whatever it is, that's like the visual reminder that you need to do these things. And that's really important, right? I bet you feel better. That's fantastic. So when we look at stress management, what have you been doing to manage stress? Are you reading a book? Are you deep breathing? Are you meditating? Are you keeping your relationships healthy? Are you talking to people, reaching out to friends? Are you trying to go for a walk and talk to other people in the park? Are you, calling your parents, your siblings, your nieces and nephews? Are you keeping those relationships strong? Because remembering that our connections, our support network is our #1 factor in recovery, whether that's mental or physical. Our mental fitness exercises, we talked about that mindfulness, we talked about deep breathing, we talked about meditation, yoga, right? Are we doing any of those? Changing our perspectives, asking ourselves what our narrative is. What story am I telling myself? Why are my thoughts negative? So finding a way to say, maybe I can see this a different way. Maybe they have different priorities. We talked about changing our thoughts when we talked about changing our thoughts, basically. And then, of course, focus on what we can control. And this is when we talked about that personal power grid, right? When we talked about things that we can control. And what is that? Just you, your thoughts, your actions, your reactions. So when we live in the mastery quadrant, when we talk about things we can control and we take action on them, whether that be get healthier, so start sleeping better, eating better, exercising, right? Those are the 3 things we can control. Or the things that we have no control of, we have to let go and accept. So live in the acceptance quadrant, when we have to stop worrying or changing or being angry about things we have no control over. Our genetics, our age, the fact that gyms are still closed, we can't change them. So we have no control over those things. So we have to accept and let go of. And as much as that's not always easy, it's very important when we think about what are things that are causing me to be upset. When last week I told you about the expectation of my husband being home when he says he's going to be home, and I have no control over that, right? I had to let go of that expectation, which I had to accept that this was the man I chose, this was the career that he has. I can't control traffic. I had to accept that this was going to be a pattern, right? So when we talk about what can I let go of, what can I let go of the fact that my spouse has different priorities than I do. So how do we complement each other? Maybe I'm better at entertainment, cooking, and maybe he's better at cutting the lawn, which I just saw is my husband cutting the lawn, knowing that I'm teaching a workshop. He probably forgot, whatever. So, right? Different priorities. So these are all the things that we have to remember, that we can't always spend time in the quitting or giving up, because that's self-defeating. If you have control over something and you don't do it, you're giving up. Same thing with hanging on to something that you don't control. Other people, the environment, the weather, the government, right? All of these different things we can control and complain about, but they're not productive, right? They're not serving us. What can we do? We can talk about it. We can try to change certain things. Would hanging on be passive aggressive behavior? Yes, right? Because the passive is um, like hanging on to an expectation. And because typically when we're passive aggressive is because we expect a certain thing and we don't get it, and so we're mad about it, and so we try to react to it, which is almost like it becomes a vicious cycle or circle, right? So mastery would be, I need to talk about or tell the other person what is bothering me or what I'm expecting, and that's why this is happening, right? Because I was passive aggressive definitely when he would always be home late, and I would just be mad at him and ignore him and whatever. So it's like, is this passive aggressive behavior affecting you because of your constant disappointment? Are you hanging on to an expectation that will just never happen? Or have you taken the opportunity to talk about it? Because passive aggressive is kind of like hanging on. Okay, you're hanging on to something that may or may not ever happen. So hopefully that's helpful, because we're always going to be disappointed. Okay, perfect, great. Expectations are the hardest thing to let go of, and why mindfulness has become such an important practice. Because if we live here and now, and we're not living in, expectations in the future or in the past, I've always been disappointed, for example, then we're always going to be bringing that with us, right? That's kind of like dragging that ball and chain with you. And living in the future with anxiety and expectation, we're going to be constantly waiting for something that may or may not ever happen. So we're wasting energy on expectations. If we live now and, this is our reality, am I okay? I'm okay now. Good, moving on. Okay, so we can, if you have any questions on that, we can come back to this, but this is just the review. Okay, we saw this last week. So to reduce stress, you want to live in the mastery quadrant. Things you can do, your reactions, responses to every situation. So taking control of you, what you have control over, or letting go, expecting things or people the way they are, letting go of the expectation that it will change. Let's focus on these, okay? All right, so getting into our new material this week, we're going to talk about avoidance and escape strategies. And this is a really sort of fun thing, or a fun part, because we know that, some things or some people will always be in our lives and we can't change that, right? But there are some things that are, things that we can do to reduce the tension or reduce the damage that we can do to any relationship, for example. So avoidance and escape strategies can be employed to reduce the tension created in dealing with an anger generating situation. So an anger generating situation could be whatever it is that's causing you distress, right? So we'll talk about some examples, and I'll give you some examples because sometimes we can't put our finger on what it is, but let me be very forthcoming in letting you know what some of these things might be. Okay, so they're not permanent solutions. This is not how we fix a problem, but this is how we can minimize the damage to the person or the relationship that, you know, or anger generating situation, whether that be traffic, right? Whether that be your in-laws, whether that be crowds, right? We know that some things are things that are always going to be in our lives, and some things we may or may not be able to avoid, but we can try to minimize our distress. Okay, so they're very effective in preventing further damage to relationships, whether that's personal or professional. So an avoidance is most effective with predictable stressors. Learning to be absent in these situations decreases the chance of an angry confrontation. So when we talked about effective with predictable stressors and learning to be absent in these situations, so we can't always avoid people that we don't like. We can't do it, right? It's not always possible. Let me give you an example. A participant in my Stress Take Charge class a few years ago noticed that every time she went to a family function, there was one particular family member that just infuriated her because of something that this person did on a regular basis. And she got upset every time, and it was almost like it ruined the whole family event for her. So one day, she just decided that she is not going to go to this particular family function and that she's going to stay home with her little family and feel less distressed that day. You know, and sometimes that's okay, right? We're okay to say no sometimes, and she's not going to avoid her family all the time. But she knew that this was a predictable stressor. She didn't want to ruin her whole weekend, decreased the chance of an angry confrontation, and learned to be absent at that time. So she just decided not to go to Thanksgiving dinner and spend it with her little family, right? She was feeling a little bit more stressed at work and she just didn't feel like going, and that's okay. Just like when, you know, things were normal and I used to teach fitness classes. Well, when my mother-in-law came to visit, I would try to sub a few extra classes just to be a little bit more absent. You know, she's lovely, but you know, sometimes being absent makes the heart grow fonder, right? As they say. So these are all ways that it didn't insult her. She knew that going to teach these classes, I made extra money, and she's always for that. And she knew she's very into fitness, and she's like, oh, good for you. And so that was great. So I learned to be absent sometimes, or at least, you know, a few hours extra during that time. So the problem can be dealt with effectively at a later date, or when you're feeling more calm, maybe less stressed. You know, these are just some things that sometimes can help with minimizing issues. So, or sometimes if it's a coworker, or if it's, I don't know, what else could it be? There's so many things that are predictable stressors. Traffic, for example, some people hate traffic, right? We know that's a predictable stressor. Well, what can you do? You can maybe, nagging mother-in-law, yes, you know, she used to change my furniture around and bring me false flowers to decorate my house. Anyways, I'm not getting into it. I learned to accept and move on. So with traffic, you can either choose to leave earlier or carpool, try another route. Again, these are predictable stressors. Did you ask you where her gifts were? No, I would bring them out when she came to visit. I'm a good daughter-in-law. So, um, so these are all things that we have to remember. If there are things that create distress for us regularly and with the same people at the same time, same place, right? When some people have co-workers that they can't stand very much. Some people will actually change their work schedule so that they don't have to be with that person as much, right? So if that's an early bird person, then you might come at an hour or an hour later and then work without that person. Or when they're on vacation, you make sure that you're at work and take vacation when they're at work, those kinds of things, right? So there's a lot of different ways that we can avoid things that cause us distress. So these are different types of avoidance. So planned avoidance, right? Planned avoidance would be subbing classes, or planned avoidance would be, again, not going to that family function, etc. And let me just plug this in. Unbelievable. All right. Can you guys still hear me? If you can give me a thumbs up, that would be great. Okay, excellent. So planned avoidance, like I said, would be all of those things that we sort of discussed, right? An avoidance by time delays. So it could also be the time delays could be the traffic, right? You change the timing for a coworker. I know that when we were getting ready for work and school, and I wasn't really good at mornings, I would leave for work earlier. So my husband had to do this whole morning issue with the children, getting them dressed and brush their teeth and on the bus. That's just something that I didn't have the patience for. So I got to go to work, you know, have my transition time, and then I was able to do the evening. So that's a time delay. Or avoidance by seeking other methods of responding. So this is another one where if someone is always, you know, if you know that you have a friend or a family or a coworker who's always asking you for something, or who's always asking you to do something for them, or somebody you just don't enjoy dealing with, or something like that. So if usually, let's say, for example, my husband is you know, interacting, let's say, with his boss or his coworkers, and they're saying, you know, can you travel on this day and this day? He always takes time to say, let me ask my wife first, whether I care or not when he travels. It doesn't matter. It's the fact that he's just going to time delay and ask for another method of responding. So instead of responding verbally, he's going to take the time to think about it and then respond by email, for example. Or if someone calls you and you know, you're like, I don't want to talk to that person right now. Sometimes you can just text and say, hey, I can't talk right now. I'll call you later. So it's just so that you're avoiding that thing or that person, and you're giving yourself almost like the opportunity to take a deep breath, maybe find a solution before you go back to that particular event or person or situation. Does that make sense? Do you see that you can work that into your life? Maybe not right now because we're all sort of stuck in our own house, but avoidance would also maybe be closing a door, or it could be, I don't know, any examples that you want to sort of throw out? Putting their own 2 cents in about what I must have missed that. Sorry, Brian. But this is kind of where avoidance strategies come in. So they're quite a lot of fun. What they think. Yeah, exactly. So escape strategies. So these are a little bit different, okay? So avoidance are typically things that you know exist, or that happen on a regular basis. They're, like we said, predictable stressors, right? Avoidance or escape strategies are a little bit different and might not always be predictable, okay? So escape strategies involve the disruption of an angry response, of angry responses. So the escape, so this particular disruption of angry responses is, we're going to talk about a couple of different things. I'm going to give you some examples so you know what I mean by that.
So this strategy is effective for situations that cannot be avoided, right? You can't learn to be absent during those times. They're always going to be around, right? They're always going to have to happen cyclically, okay? So by having a plan, you're more likely to prevent situations from getting worse. Okay, so, and again, these are not always permanent solutions, but they might be a good solution for that particular moment. So the types of escape strategies. Okay, because I always feel I want to get away from answering your, yeah. Now this whole asking to circle back, we're going to talk about how to do that with the types of escape strategies and also the DESC script. It is hard to come back and to talk about, you know, with the things that are making you uncomfortable. But it's better that they know, and you'd be surprised sometimes how people respond and they're like, oh, I didn't know that that upset you, or I'm sure we can work on that, or let's find a solution. And it's about how you approach the situation, right? So let's talk about types of escape strategies. So when we look at a planned escape would be, for example, if you're going on a blind date and you make sure that your friend calls you, 43 minutes into this date to see how things are going. So that's a planned escape. So if it's going terribly wrong, I don't know, I've never been on a blind date, but if it's going terribly wrong, you have this planned escape strategy in case you need to get away from this person, right? Or my coworker had to sort of every 2 weeks, she had to meet her ex-husband to exchange, I don't know, I think it was a check or a letter or some kind of keys, or I can't remember what. So the planned escape strategy, she's like, just so that I don't have to talk to this guy, can you just call me and tell me that there's something happening at work that needs my attention? So that was a planned escape. So I had a 10-minute mark. I had to call her within 10 minutes of her leaving the office so that she had a planned escape to not have to have a conversation with her ex. So that's what sort of that particular thing is. Type of escape strategy is distraction. So this is another example. So my friend has a daughter who has, I'm going to say, volatile mental health issues. She has a mental health illness that sort of disrupts the ability to maintain reasoning. So for her, when there's an anger generating situation, sometimes the distraction is just calling out a silly name. So when her daughter starts to yell and lose her, her sense or her reasoning, my friend will yell out, hippopotamus. And so that's distracting because you can't be upset when someone yells hippopotamus. You can't. And so that distraction snaps her out of her tunnel, and she's able to refocus on the issue at hand. So that's a distraction. Or sometimes people do that with children where they try to get them to look at something else or to behave a different way or go, oh, look over there, and it sets them off. So there's a lot of other things that you can use as a distraction method, but these are some of the things that we've come to use. And there's the timeout strategy. So the timeout strategy, we are going to have a whole slide on it. So I'm just going to pass that and to go to it. Okay, so planned escape. Basically, this avoids the need to run from an anger generating situation. That fight or flight response gets reduced because you know that you're going to have a way out, or you're going to be able to manage it because the time you spend in this anger generating situation might be shorter than it could have been. Okay. So this gives you control over your emotions and helps others involved to take time to think instead of react. So just like with the distraction, or with the planned escape with someone giving you a phone call, in your head that you're going to be okay because you're going to have a way out. And so you're not going to be as heightened in terms of energy or in terms of negative energy with this particular type of planned escape. You know that you're going to be able to manage that. So when you feel like you have more control over your emotions because you've controlled your situation a little bit, you're less reactive. So you're going to be able to remain more calm within the situation. And it gives a time frame for when the problem will be dealt with further. With a planned escape, sometimes you have to, like we were saying, circle back or come back to talk about the reason that it was so volatile or the reason that things got heightened. Sometimes you'll never be able to come back to it, right? My coworker is ex with her husband for a reason. They're not going to sort of circle back and talk about it now. It's over. But when it comes to the timeout, that's going to be a really important way to make sure that this doesn't happen over and over and over again. Would a checklist also be an example of a planned escape? A checklist. I guess it depends on what you mean by a checklist. Do you mean sort of, I have to do something else, so I'm going to I'm going to go. It could also be, some people will actually schedule personal time or something time in their calendar so that they can escape, right? I got a dog so that I had time to escape my family twice a day. And that wasn't maybe premeditated as much, but when I sort of got to get up and, oh, look, Bear needs a walk. See ya. So that was my planned escape. I could get up and walk away and be doing a chore. So I was doing a good thing. So when we talk about examples of planned escapes, when you schedule a busy time in your schedule so that your boss, oh, okay, they must be busy during that time, you can get out and go for a walk or do your exercise or maybe do some meditation or whatever. Okay, yeah, if writing things down reduces your stress level because you don't want to forget it, yes, absolutely. Making a checklist can help with managing that. It's not an escape strategy necessarily, but it's a stress management strategy for sure. Okay, so when we talk about distraction, this is helpful in highly emotional situations to refocus the emotional energy, right? With the hippopotamus, or some people do some clapping. Some people my friends sometimes will just hug when it's becoming a little bit too volatile, or especially children who are getting very, very agitated. Sometimes they need a time in, which is just a hug until they, as opposed to a timeout where they're being punished for having emotions. So distraction is also something that's very important if it happens regularly, and then they'll be able to manage that a little bit more. Activities or to temporarily escape emotional tension can help to avoid dwelling or short-term discomfort, right? Just like anybody who can't control their emotions yet, maybe people with mental illness or people who have children, or sometimes when you're just tired, right? When you're just tired, sometimes your escape strategy is, I need to have a nap. Mommy needs a timeout. Okay. And it allows you to re-engage rationally with the problem rather than emotionally. So find a longer term solution. So the escape strategies and the avoidance strategies are short term. They're not permanent. They are just there to make sure that we reduce the tension, that we don't feel as vulnerable or we don't feel angry as regularly, because that's really hard on you. So this is about you, whatever works for you, whatever you feel comfortable with, whatever you feel ready or able to do, right? Whether you decide not to go to a family function, not that you can right now, I'm saying in sort of regular times, because one person is driving you crazy. Whether you decide that you need to take some time to yourself and you need to put it in your calendar so that nobody can reach you, right? Turn your phone off at a certain time during the day or the night. If you have a BlackBerry, for example, right? You need to find a way that you can manage the possible anger generating situations if they happen to you on a regular basis. Okay. Or you ask for help, right? Sometimes people don't know that certain situations cause you more distress than anything else. There's nothing wrong with saying you're doing morning because I can't. You're much better with patients. You're a much more morning person than I am. I'm going to go and I'll do afternoons. Or, there's so many different ways that we can find to manage our own distress, but you have to be willing to think about it a little bit. Okay. So now let's think about those timeout situations. Do you guys remember the anger mountain, right? Trigger, escalation, crisis, decompression, and then, I can't remember what this one was, but then we have depression afterwards. So we all remember that the trigger is that preparation for attack. Remembering that when we feel that fight or flight response, we trigger because of our thoughts. I feel like, or I'm perceiving that I'm being threatened, whether that's my beliefs are being threatened or when my expectations are being threatened, but something is happening. So we talked about, what do you feel inside your body when you're starting to prepare for an attack? So some people said they feel hot. Some people say they start to shake, their jaw clenches, they get headaches or tension. This is your body telling you it's time for a timeout. So this is where, if you get angry on a regular basis, okay, this is something, if it happens all the time and two people are yelling at each other, you're never going to get anywhere. So the timeout is right when you're climbing that escalation phase. You decide before you get angry, let's say on a calm day or after supper, whatever, you say, hey, we argue a lot, or, this particular situation is causing us a lot of distress. How about next time, instead of yelling at each other, we call a timeout, and this is what we're going to do when we want to step away, because we don't want to further damage our relationship or say anything more that might not be nice. Okay. So the timeout helps you step back from the situation, because if you're in it, you're going to hit that crisis point. What happens at this point? You're not thinking. So empathy, you're going to say and do things that you regret, or that you don't, or you're just not listening, right? Nothing's going to get resolved. The step back gives you time to think about what you want to do next. And you're going to use a coping thought. This is not time when you ruminate, or this is not time when you think about revenge or what else I can say to make them regret this or make them feel bad about this. You use a coping thought. What was my trigger? What was I thinking? What am I telling myself? What story am I saying to myself to make me so frustrated? What about this situation is making me angry? Because we know it's not the situation. It's what about it? Do I feel like I'm being disrespected? Do I feel like I'm being mistreated? Do I feel like I'm, being neglected? Whatever it is that might be. Why is this upsetting you? Think about it. Helps you to return to the situation in a calm manner. Every timeout needs a time in. So the timeout process. So plan timeouts when you're calm. Okay, this might be the day after the storm. Next time this happens, how about we plan a timeout? Usually you do this with someone with a relationship you want to maintain. Okay. When do you do this? Anytime either party feels like they're losing control. And that's really important. You both have to be on board here. And how does this happen? You agree on a signal. And when you call a timeout, the discussion ends immediately. You don't say, and another thing, and you don't follow that person when they say, I need 20 minutes to go for a walk or take a bath or exercise. Discussion ends immediately. And you've agreed to this, okay? So you don't follow the other person, but you have to tell them what you're going to do, where you're going to be, and when you're going to be back. Timeouts always require a time in. So if you call a timeout, you give a time frame. I'm going to go for a walk. I'll be back in 20 minutes. We're going to think about options and solutions, and then come back in again. because timeouts are really just to no longer further the there we go. So we need to make sure that both of you are on board here. Okay, this can happen with kids and this can happen with adults, because kids understand too that a timeout doesn't need to be a bad thing. A timeout just means a rest period, right? It just means that I need to step away from the anger generating situation. And it shows that, you know, mommy has control. I don't want to say or do anything that I regret. So how about I'm going to take a step away. I'm going to take a timeout. And how about you, you know, go, I don't know, jump on the trampoline or go on for a bike ride and come back. And we can talk about why I'm so upset or why, you know, we're yelling at each other. So this is really important, especially on regular occurring frustration, anger generating situations. Good to go. So that's the timeout process. So when you come back, you choose a solution when you're calm. Hey, you've both gone for a walk. Maybe you've both gone, had a snack or whatever, taken a deep breath. You've thought about options. You come back and you talk about maybe what it is that triggered you or what it is that you heard. And this is when we talk about how we're going to communicate that. And that's how we're going to go to the DESC script. So what is communication? If I ask you to throw something in the chat, what is communication? What do you think that that is? Listening. Isn't that interesting how that's the first thing you put up there? Communication is a lot of listening. And the more listening you do, the better off your situation is going to end up. Isn't that interesting? Nobody else knows what communication is? I think that's fantastic because we don't know. We're not communicating anymore, right? Interconnection between two people. Yes, right? So it's a back and forth. So it's an exchange of information, expressing your message in a way that the other person will hear and understand, and listening and attempting to understand the message from the other person. We often forget the second part. We just want people to know our way, our opinion, our thoughts, but we're not necessarily willing to attempt to understand the other person. And normally, if we take time to understand each other, because remembering we both come from different backgrounds, cultures, values, experiences, that our understanding of the situation is different, or how we say things is interpreted differently. So we need to make sure that, I don't know if any of you have ever had a conversation with somebody and then stopped and asked them, so what did you hear me say? What message are you hearing me say? And then be completely surprised and shocked at what comes back. I've done that once or twice and I'm just completely baffled as to what it is that he heard. I don't even know where it came from. But clearly there's a miscommunication or misunderstanding in the message, right? So when we talk about assertive communication, assertiveness is a behavior. So it's stating what you want or need in a way that is respectful to others. Coding message, transmission of message, and decoding message. Oh yes, if it only were that simple, right? The coding sometimes get lost in translation. So when we talk about assertiveness, we want to make sure that we are talking in a way that is not going to reflective listening, right? When you reflect back what you hear. I love it. So assertive communication is a way to communicate with others, and remembering that we don't want to attack them. We don't want to hurt them. We just want to change the situation so it doesn't create any more anger for you. So we respecting our own rights and opinions as well as those of others. Focus on the problem solving or resolution of the conflict, and not intended to hurt the other person. So when we talk about, let's say, the dishes being left on the counter, the problem is the dish on the counter. So if we start saying, you are an issue because you're a dirty slob and you don't care about how I this and how I that, and you don't do this and you don't do that, we're not being nice, we're hurting the other person and we're not solving the problem, right? We're just telling them that they're a slob, they're going to be defensive, and they're going to call you another name. So focusing on the problem is really, I get very frustrated when dishes are left on the counter. Not, you are a dirty slob and you leave all of your stuff everywhere, right? Very different. So assertive communication is about my opinion, my feelings, how I'm seeing the situation, and then we communicate it that way. So when we talk about guidelines for the speaker, we need to use assertive communication. We need to speak for ourselves clearly, calmly, use I statements, be brief, stay on one topic, one conflict at a time, and give the listener a chance to understand. Okay, there's a lot of things to do as a speaker, because if you go on and on and on and on and on about all kinds of things, then the issue is going to get lost. So when we talk about trying to speak about one problem, we're trying to keep it very brief so that there's not as much fluff and stuff that gets in the way of the one issue that we're having. So the listener, you pay attention, don't interrupt, don't finish other people's sentences. Show that you're listening. When we talk about reflective listening or active listening, right? You're looking at them, you are nodding your head, you're saying, okay, so if I understand what you're saying that dishes on the counter makes you feel disrespected. Is that what I'm hearing, right? So remembering that you're trying to be honest, yet assert your opinions respectfully and treat others the way you want to be treated. So there has to be some kind of a guideline, and you can even establish these guidelines before having a conversation. We actually have a 4-week communication workshop when we go back to normal life that is very helpful. So what's an I statement? I statement, what you feel and how you see the situation or the event or the behavior that evokes your feelings. Avoid using the word you, right? So I feel frustrated when the dishes are left on the counter. I didn't even say I feel frustrated when you leave your dishes on the counter, because it could be somebody else who leaves their dishes on the counter. It doesn't matter. It's about the fact that there's this one thing that makes you feel very flustered or frustrated or unappreciated or whatever. So it's a one event or whatever. It could be anything. As long as we try to avoid the word you, it's very difficult. So an example is, I feel when this happens. So I feel frustrated or nervous when my things are borrowed without asking. Okay, I didn't say when you take my stuff. I said, I feel frustrated when my things are borrowed without asking. Easy. Even though it takes time to think about it, even though you know it's them and they know that it's them, it's still so much better to not do this, because then they get defensive and then they attack you back and then nothing gets resolved. Okay. So I statements are very important, and try to use them as much as possible in a calm tone, not in a sarcastic tone either. Okay, very difficult as well. So this is the DESC script, and this is what we're going to be following for communication. Describe the behavior or situation, be objective or non-judgmental. Express your reactions, your feelings or thoughts about what happened in an I statement. Specify what you need in that situation. And I'm going to tell you that number 3 is the most important. And then the positive consequence of what will happen if you get what you need. And then you finish the sentence, you seal the deal with, would you be willing to do that? Or can we do that together? Or are you willing to help me with that? Okay. So here's a generic example. So D or E, describe or express, can be interchanged, right? So you can say, I feel upset about the situation, or this situation makes me feel. Okay, so D or E can be switched. So I feel very negative emotion when this situation happens. Or when this situation happens, it makes me feel very hurt, upset, sad, neglected, exhausted, etc. So the specify and the consequence, I need this situation to stop or be done differently so I can feel happier, less frustrated, not ignored. Can you help me with that, or are you willing to do that? So I'll give you some examples of how this was used in the past. So in one of my workshops, there was a mom who was always getting up with the children every morning. Okay, the husband, I assume, did other things, but she was always the one getting up in the morning. So I feel exhausted when I get up every day with the children. I would like to have one day on the weekend to sleep in so that I can feel happier and more rested. Are you willing to help me with that? She didn't say, you don't do anything, you never get up, you know, you're whatever. I feel exhausted by the end of the week when I get up with the children every day. I need to sleep in one day of the weekend so that happier consequence, so that I can feel more rested and ready to go as well. Can you help me with that? So nobody felt defensive, nobody felt upset, expressed kindly, and then at least it's out there. The reason you need to specify what you need is because if you just say, I feel exhausted from getting up with the kids every morning. Yep, I bet you do. Nothing gets resolved, right? So she has to say, I want one day of the weekend. So which day would you choose, or which day are you willing to give me, for example? Okay. Sleeping in turns on weekends. Nice. That's nice, right? You have to sleep. Sleep is so important, and it makes you recover. You feel amazing afterwards. So this is where, another situation was we had a couple living on IR, and, one person would always hang up on the other person at the end of their conversation without saying goodbye or miss you or love you or whatever. So I feel very hurt when a conversation is ended by hanging up without saying goodbye. I really need to feel closure at the end of our conversation so that I know that we're still connected. Are you willing to do that for me? Right? I need to have closure. I need to, the specify what you need is really important. So when we talk about expressing one thing, whether that be, I feel very disrespected when all of the dishes are left on the counter. I really need us all to help put things in the dishwasher after lunch so I can also have time to enjoy my lunch hour. Are we willing to do that? Right? So it's not, there's no fluff. Nothing's hidden you don't have to read between the lines. I know exactly what your feeling is. Your feelings aren't wrong. You're allowed to have your feelings. You know what you need. You need everybody to put stuff. So nobody's confused about what happens. You're being respectful. You're not calling anybody a name. And then you're asking them for their help. And the reason you need that specify what you need, the third line, is because when you say, are you willing to help me with that? And they say, well, no, not really. Okay, well, I need the counter to be clean after lunch. So what are you willing to do? So you always go back to I need. Okay? So that's a lot. It's a lot to digest. We're going to revise next week when we talk about forgiveness. We're going to talk about forgiveness next week. But any questions or comments on that? You're welcome to take a picture of it if you want, or again, I'll put it up on YouTube, and you're welcome to listen to it again. But this is kind of that. If you want something to stop happening, or if you need something to change, and the other person doesn't know it, instead of becoming passive aggressive and just being upset about it, or throwing in snarky remarks or calling somebody names, you can just fix it. right? This is how you fix it. Remember how we said anger is a problem that needs to be solved? As long as you find out what that problem is, this can help you solve it. Okay, just like the escape or avoidance strategies as well. And sometimes you just need to take a deep breath, right? Sometimes our cup is full and we're just tired, and that's okay. We're human, right? We talked about sometimes we have to forgive ourselves for being human and losing our cool and going to that crisis point. That's okay. So sometimes you just need to take a deep breath, know that things will get better, and then move on, right? Is it worth it to get angry about this, right? That coping thought. What do I have control over? Maybe I just need to take a deep breath. Maybe I just need to go for a walk, right? Then I'm like, hey, Barry, you want to go? He's probably like, did I just hear the word? So this is where, we just need to make sure that we give ourselves permission to take some time. Or we can talk to somebody, make sure that you know what all your resources are because they're very important. Talking to somebody is very important, especially if you just need to bounce your ideas off someone. A third party sometimes is great to have that ability to interact. So whether that be by text, by phone, by email, a lot of the different places now are you can do it different ways. Or contact us, health promotion, and you know where to follow us. All right, so this is the end of our third session. I hope that you took something away from that. Anybody have some takeaway? What's your takeaway from today? What's something that will stick with you or that stuck with you or that you're willing to try today? Oh, you're very welcome. I hope you enjoyed it and see you again next week, same time, same place. I'm sorry I went a couple of minutes over. But this one is an important one, and we'll review again next week. So again, if you have any questions or comments, please, I'm going to stay on. I'm going to stop the recording.